Today I am going to continue going over the 16th chapter of the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. And this chapter is on the perfection of meditative concentration. So where I left off was the discussion of eliminating disturbing emotions. And I touched on the remedy to desire, which is to meditate on unpleasant things, so that our desire is rooted in our attachment to our body, and that this inner attachment leads to outer attachment. And so the remedy is to think about our body as being made up of parts that really aren't all that pleasant, like blood, brains, bone, and so forth. And to realize that there is really nothing that is permanent there, and so forth. And if we can eliminate attachment to our body, all other forms of attachment then are weakened and will disappear too. So then the next remedy is a remedy to anger. And this is important today because there's just so much anger going around in the world today. So it's very simple. Meditate on loving kindness. Meditate on how the person that you are angry at, instead do Tonglen and send loving kindness back to them. Take on their anger and you give them back loving kindness. The remedy to ignorance is to meditate on interdependent origination. That in a way, all the other afflictive states of mind, desire and anger, for instance, involve a certain amount of ignorance. And so since ignorance is not knowing, then the remedy is to know that things don't cause themselves to arise, that things arise due to causes and conditions, and that our anger, which is mixed with ignorance, our desire, which is mixed with ignorance, all of these things arise in interdependence. Then he talks about jealousy, the remedy to jealousy. And here it is to meditate on the similarity of self and other. That jealousy comes from separating ourselves from other and thinking that another person has a better deal than we have. But if we meditate on what we have in common, that this person that we're jealous of, they want to be happy just like we do. They want to be free of suffering just like us. That they have difficulties in their life just like me, and so forth. And just realize that there is much more in common that we have with these people that we are jealous of than we have differences. And then there is a remedy for pride. Pride, Trungpa Rinpoche talks about the Tibetan word for pride is translated as I, the king. And this is feeling that you are better than other people. And whether it is justified or not, needless to say. So the remedy for the pride is to meditate on exchanging self for others, which again is the Tonglen practice. And seeing that egotism leads to pain and concern for others bring good things our way. That that the Buddhas are free from pride, and that pride actually frequently results from thinking that you are less than others, and you've got to make a point of convincing yourself and other people that you are better than them. So this is an important point. A lot of times when pride comes up in ourselves, it's not because we actually think that we are better, but we think that we are worse than other people, and we have to go out of our way to prove that we are actually better. So altruism is really important, and to realize that altruism leads to good things in the world, and that ego causes pain. And pride and all these others, the root of them is ego. And then the point 6 in this series is if the disturbing emotions and discursive thoughts are equally present, then meditate on the breath. In other words, if you've got lots and lots and lots of thoughts going around your head, your mind, and you're just all over the place, then just meditate on the breath. That basically you need to stabilize your mind. That if your mind isn't stable, none of these other remedies are really going to work, at least not for long. They're just not going to be very effective because your mind is too wild. It's too busy. That we need how to gain control of our mind, to, you might say, ground our mind, to have the mind being stable, or at least a little more stable. Then the next point here, after going through these remedies, is to transform disturbing emotions. These first 6 points were about eliminating disturbing emotions. So next, he talks about transforming disturbing emotions. And this is very simple. And that is to have our motivation be that of bodhicitta, being motivated to practice and travel the path so that we can bring others to the path and lead them to liberation. So we're motivated to study and practice and travel the path so that we can be of most benefit to others. And then the third is the special instructions from the lineage of Marpa. And again, these are all ways of working with disturbing emotions. So the first was to eliminate them. The second is to transform them. And this special instructions is to very simply rest in the nature of mind. So the technique is to let the mind be within its own nature, to let the mind rest in its natural condition. These are Mahamudra instructions. And it is Marpa that brought these Mahamudra instructions back from India and passed them on to Milarepa. So you look inward, try to see what's going on. And again, it requires some stability. If your mind isn't stable when you look within, you're not going to see much. What comes to mind, I don't know. I think many of you have had this experience, driving in a snowstorm, and it's at night, and you turn your lights on, and the brighter the lights, the more snow you see. And it's like you really, you're not seeing what you want to see, which is the road and anything that might be in the way on the middle of the road or coming at you. And it's a bit like that. If our mind is wild, there's so much going on that we are not seeing the mind. We're just seeing you could say the snowflakes, the distraction, the lack of clarity. So if we do have some stability and clarity, then we face what's going on in the mind. And if you're angry, you look at the anger and try to find it. Try to see it. And again, if you're doing this technique properly and your mind is stable, you'll find that you can't even find the anger. And the reason is that the anger has no reality. That the nature of the mind is emptiness and clarity, that it's not the contents. And so all negative emotions vanish when this examination is done properly. And it takes a lot of training to get to the point of being able to do this. And I'm going to get into the last paramita, the perfection of wisdom, and touch on this in more depth in that section. So now we get to the classification of meditative concentration. And so there are three aspects to what meditative concentration can do. Meditative concentration, which gives one happiness while it's practiced. Meditative concentration that produces all good qualities. And meditative concentration that can accomplish the good of beings. The next point is the characteristics of each classification. So he goes over these in briefly. The meditative concentration that gives one happiness while practiced. This is described as once we have control over our mind, all suffering disappears by itself. That with this meditative concentration, that the causes and conditions that support suffering are gone. Therefore, the suffering is gone. So that's why one can attain happiness while concentrating. The second is meditative concentration, which produces all good qualities. So here, when you are meditating and having this first, which is the meditation that brings happiness, this, since it eliminates suffering, it allows our qualities, our inherent qualities, to surface and manifest. And the third is a meditative concentration that can accomplish the good of beings. So if we have attained A and B, then C, automatically we will be doing things that accomplish the good of others. It is, you might say, spontaneous when we have controlled our mind. So then the fifth point is increase. And this is the same as all the others that he has covered. So increase is due to the power of primordial wisdom, wisdom awareness, and dedication. This paramita of meditative concentration will increase. Then the sixth point is perfection. And what perfects it is the meditative concentration made pure by understanding emptiness and great compassion. And the results, there are short-term results and long-term. The short-term results is once the mind is stable, the qualities will develop automatically. The long-term is, I'm going to just read a quote here. We will gain all the qualities of meditation, will develop prajna, the deepest form of understanding, end quote. In other words, we will accomplish Buddhahood. And there's a question and answer session after going through this chapter, and it's kind of interesting, so I'm going to go over it quickly. The first question was, at least these are the words that I sum it up with, how do you know what the strongest negative emotion is? And the answer is just think about it. Usually it's pretty obvious what our strongest negative emotion is, unless we're in denial. The next one basically is not a clear question, and Prangu Rinpoche says, I don't understand the question. But he does say that that the mind, he said that the part of the mind that I think you are asking about is very active, it's very discursive, and that is what needs to be purified, this active, discursive aspect of mind. So then the question is about transformation, which Prajna Rinpoche does not spend much time in the book talking about. That goes back to transforming disturbing emotions, if you remember. The first part was eliminating disturbing emotions, and the third part was special instructions from the lineage of Marpa. So the question is, what about transformation? And the translator actually, before he even asked Prajna Rinpoche, said, he talked about bodhicitta motivation. And so then Prajna Rinpoche tells the story about the Buddha recollecting that in one of his previous lives, he killed a man who was on a ship with him, and the man was going to sink the ship and kill all 500 people on the ship. And the point being that his motivation was to save the lives of 500 people, and also to keep the man from accumulating the negative karma of killing 500 people. And therefore, because of his motivation, his action was beneficial and virtuous. And then the final question was a follow-up. And it was the Buddha angry when he did that. And Trungpa Rinpoche answered by saying that it wasn't real anger due to his motivation. So that completes the 16th chapter of the book, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation. And now I'm going to start on the chapter 17, the perfection of wisdom awareness, or Prajnaparamita. He starts out by briefly talking about reflecting on the faults and virtues. So with Prajnaparamita, when coupled with the other five paramitas, this leads to Buddhahood. That because of Prajnaparamita, they all lead to going beyond this samsaric existence. But without this perfection of wisdom, we accumulate merit, but we don't have the possibility of going beyond. He uses the example of being blind, that if we are blind, we can't tell where we are going, and therefore we can't get to where we want to go. So this is the most important of the paramitas if we are going to transcend samsara. And unlike the other five paramitas, he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about this. I did a little research and want to talk a little bit here about prajna and to help clarify things. So prajna means perfect knowledge. It means wisdom, understanding, or discrimination. That's why he talks about wisdom awareness. And in the dictionary, the glossary at the end of the book, it is said that it usually means wisdom of seeing things from a high, non-dualistic point of view. That the Tibetan of Prajnaparamita literally means gone to the other side or gone beyond. Now here is from another source. This is a quote by Ringu Tulku, who again is a Kagyupa. And he says, the difference between prajna or sherab and yeshe, and yeshe is primordial wisdom. Prajna is this highest knowledge. So the difference between sherab and yeshe is very subtle and slight. But I think we can say that yeshe is the most natural state of our awareness or consciousness, which is unstained, uncontrived, and completely ordinary. It is there all the time, but we don't recognize it. It is sherab that brings about the recognition. But of course, they are not two separate things. So Trungpa Rinpoche doesn't really talk about this, but through the Prajnaparamita, and prajna again is sherab, the highest knowledge, that it allows us then to experience our primordial wisdom, our yeshe, which is unchanging and so forth, unborn, undying. So now, the second point here is definition. Just like all the others, the second point in all of them was definition. So here's a quote The essence of the Prajnaparamita is its very nature, is the exact discerning, the exact understanding and appreciation and exact discrimination of phenomena. It is seeing and understanding things as they truly are in a very exact and discerning manner, end quote. So discerning means that we're not mixing up everything. We're seeing differences. We're seeing differences in phenomena, along with seeing their essence is the same. There is a state or a stage in Mahamudra practice, which is called one taste. And so it is seeing the essence is the same, while also seeing that the appearances are different and seeing the appearances clearly. So this is no mistake, no confusion, very, very clear, seeing the way things appear and also the way things are. The third point here is classification. So there are different aspects of this prajna or sharap. It is the best form of understanding, cognition, the best mind, the best knowledge. So these are kind of repeating what was already said, but it bears repeating because this is, of course, the most difficult of all the paramitas. So the three aspects are wisdom, awareness of the mundane, wisdom, awareness of the lesser, super mundane, wisdom, awareness of the greater, super mundane. So now he gets to point 4, the characteristics of each classification. So wisdom, awareness of the mundane. What this is a form of understanding of worldly phenomena, worldly intelligence, worldly knowledge. This is what allows us to find satisfaction, contentment, and well-being in our human lives. And this is important. If we lack this, our lives are going to be a mess. We're going to be discontent. We're going to be dissatisfied. We're going to be running around in circles. And our mind is just going to be full of all kinds of thoughts. So this is important. But this is not just, you might say, the beginning. So the next is wisdom, awareness of the lesser supramundane. And this is an understanding of the foundation level, or the Hinayana, that this is the peak of this is actually conquering the kleshas, the afflictive states of mind. But this does not really lead you to seeing things completely. You still have some obscurations that need to be purified. And so this is why it's lesser supermundane. And the third is the wisdom awareness of the greater supermundane. And this is the highest level of spiritual knowledge. This is the completion of the Mahayana path, the knowing the nature of all things, knowing that there is no inherent solid self, and that other objects and people and so forth also have no inherent self entity. So now he does a brief introduction to the next 2 points, 5 and 6. And he says that this is going to be different than the other 5 paramitas. So that these only apply to this 6th paramita, the Prajnaparamita. So don't get too, basically he's saying, don't get too concerned if I break the mold that I've been following for the first 5. So what needs to be known, wisdom awareness, is point 5. And the reason why this needs to be known is that we cannot go beyond suffering and conditioned existence without it. And he briefly goes through the different kinds of suffering that the Buddha talked about, the suffering of change, that things due to impermanence and interdependence are constantly changing, whether we want it or not. And then there is, he used the term universal suffering. Frequently, the term is all-pervasive suffering, but it basically means that as long as we are in samsara and subject to change, subject to birth, death, old age, sickness, and so forth, and as long as we're grasping onto an ego, which is fabricated and has no inherent existence and is subject to change, that we are steeped in suffering. And it's so pervasive that we don't even have a clue of how much we're suffering, because it's been this way life after life after life. It's like our oxygen. And the third type of suffering is the suffering of suffering, and it describes that as just basically the 4 sufferings that the Buddha talked about as birth, old age, sickness, and death. So if we are ignorant about the nature of things, true happiness cannot be found. It's that simple. So this is why we cannot go beyond suffering until we have the perfection of wisdom. We need to understand the way things are, what the root of suffering is, and realize that it is that we take the world to be real, true, and solid, and we also take that we have this self that is real, solid, independent, true, and so forth. So we have all kinds of ways that we deny that these things are not fabricated, but we need to cut the root of suffering if we are going to attain permanent happiness. And so we need to know this self-deception. So he uses the classic example of mistaking a rope for a snake. So as soon as you see that it is a rope and not a snake, then the fear of a snake is gone. The suffering of having this fear of a snake is gone. That you see it as an illusion. And so that is the point with this Prajnaparamita. As we perfect it, we start seeing that what we thought was real is really an illusion. Quote, once we understand that the nature of samsara is only illusory, then all suffering that comes along with samsara will disappear automatically. The question is the story about the Buddha killing the man that was going to sink the ship and kill 500 people. Is that wrath? And I can only speculate, but I suspect he did not do it with wrath at all. It was just plain this needed to be done, that there was no anger at all. It was just, this needs to be done. I have to save people. Just like, let's say you see someone, you're at the beach and you see someone out there in the water that can't swim, and they're flailing and thrashing the water, and you just go in and try to save them, not because you're angry, but because you want to save them. You see that they're suffering. The question is, the motivation is to free all beings without exception. And this seems like an impossible task because the Buddha couldn't free all beings, Karmapa hasn't freed all beings, and so on. So how are we to take this? And the point is that this is an aspiration. That, and this is the highest aspiration because it's the most difficult. One of the stories about Thousand-Armed Chenrezig was that Chenrezig, after working countless aeons to liberate beings and freed an infinite number of beings, kind of took a break, looked at the situation and saw that there were as many sentient beings now as when he started aeons ago, and got rather discouraged. And I believe he then was bestowed 1,000 arms and 11 heads so that he could work even harder to free sentient beings. So the point is that to have this aspiration, and don't get discouraged, but realize it is the Buddhas, because there are plenty of past Buddhas, and these great bodhisattvas have been working countless aeons to free beings, and there's still huge numbers, an infinite number to be freed. So don't give up. And don't try to, well, I'm going to free 2 or 1 or myself. The motivation is really important. And it's like, if you don't want to become an Olympic champion, you'll never become an Olympic champion. But if you have that motivation, you might become an Olympic champion.